Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Tom Rivers thought oceanfront life meant peace until the HOA president marched up his deck with fake eviction papers and a smile like a shark. What started as a petty power play turned into a high-stakes war of lies, threats, and law, where one man's home became the last line of defense. I had barely been back in my little slice of paradise for 24 hours when the trouble started. The Atlantic was calm that morning, a sheet of silver under the rising sun, and I was standing on my weathered cedar deck, nursing a mug of coffee and listening to the waves. My wife, Lisa, was still upstairs, and the kids were in that blissful morning coma only teenagers can manage. This was the time of day I loved most, quiet, unhurried, and a world away from clients and courtrooms. I didn't even have my phone with me. That was when I spotted movement down the sandy path from the dunes. At first, I thought it might be one of the neighbors coming by to say hello, but as the shapes came into focus, I realized it was 3 people walking with the purposeful stride of folks who aren't here for a chat. 2 men wore matching navy windbreakers with the words HOA compliance printed across the chest. Between them strode a woman in a tailored navy suit, her blonde hair lacquered into an immovable helmet, a leather portfolio clutched in her hand like it was the nuclear football. Even before she opened her mouth, I knew exactly who it was. Mr. Rivers, she called as they stepped onto my deck without so much as a hello. I'm Karen Blackwood, president of the Ocean Pearl Homeowners Association. I'm here to serve you with an official notice. Her tone had that sweet and sour mix only certain people can pull off, saccharine enough to sound polite, acidic enough to let you know she didn't mean a word of it. She pulled out a stack of printed pages stamped with a round blue seal that looked like it had been designed by someone drunk on clip art. This property, she began, reading as if she were announcing a royal decree, is now within the jurisdiction of Ocean Pearl HOA under our newly expanded coastal boundaries. Your residence does not meet community standards and is, therefore, in violation of our bylaws. You are required to vacate the premises with your family and personal belongings within 8 hours of this notice being served. I stared at her for a moment, letting the words hang in the salt air like a bad smell. Then I set my coffee cup down. You're aware, I said slowly, that this is private land, outside your HOA boundaries? Karen's smile widened, the way a cat smiles at a cornered mouse. Not anymore. The board voted last week to extend our authority along the coastline. You're in. And you're out, unless you want to face fines and legal action. If you disagree, by all means, call the police. The 2 compliance officers shifted behind her, clearly there for intimidation more than muscle. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I kept my voice calm. Karen, your boundaries don't change the county property lines. This land has been in my family for decades. You have 0 jurisdiction here. She made a dismissive noise, as if my legal background was a minor inconvenience compared to her HOA gospel. I suggest you start packing. We'll be back to ensure compliance. Lisa's voice floated down from the upstairs window. Tom, what's going on? I looked up at her. Just a little morning theater. Call the sheriff's office, please. Karen raised an eyebrow. Do that. Let's see if they side with someone ignoring community standards or with the governing body maintaining the integrity of this neighborhood. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called dispatch myself, giving the operator my address and explaining that I had trespassers on my property delivering a fake eviction notice. The operator promised a unit would be there within minutes. Karen didn't move. She started walking around the deck, peering in windows, scribbling notes on a clipboard. The men with her were taking photographs of my shutters, my mailbox, even my kids' kayaks leaning against the fence. You know this is illegal, I said, stepping into her path. What's illegal is letting this place sit here looking quaint when we're striving for a consistent aesthetic along the shore, she replied without missing a beat. I wanted to laugh, but the longer she stood there, the more I realized she actually believed the nonsense spilling from her mouth. I kept my eyes on the curve of the dunes where the access path met the road. Any minute now. Sure enough, the familiar shape of a county patrol SUV came crawling over the sandy rise. Karen's posture stiffened, but she didn't step back. The deputies got out, hands resting casually near their belts, and one of them I recognized, Deputy Harris, a guy I'd once represented in a minor property dispute before I retired from law. Mornin', Tom, he said, glancing between me and Karen's little delegation. What's all this? Karen was on him instantly, waving her papers like they were the 10 Commandments. Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man is illegally occupying a property now under Ocean Pearl jurisdiction. We've served notice. He's refusing to comply. Harris took the pages, skimmed the first one, and I swear his lips twitched. He passed them to his partner, who didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Ma'am," Harris said, "these aren't legal documents. An HOA doesn't have the power to annex private land outside its established boundaries." Karen's face twitched. "I have the backing of the county council." "No, ma'am, you don't," Harris interrupted, "and you're currently trespassing. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to leave this property, or we'll be filling out a report you won't enjoy reading later." For the first time, Karen's confidence faltered. She shot me a look that could have blistered paint, spun on her heel, and marched back down the path, her compliance team trailing after her. I picked up my coffee again. Still warm. The next morning, the air had that heavy, salty stillness that comes right before the heat rolls in. I'd slept surprisingly well for a man who'd just been told to clear out of his own home in 8 hours by a woman who thought her HOA was the United Nations. Lisa was in the kitchen making breakfast, and the kids were still sprawled out in their rooms, blissfully oblivious to neighborhood politics. I figured the day might actually be quiet. Then I saw the same path through the dunes, only this time it was empty. At first, what broke the calm was a faint crunch of tires on gravel coming from the front of the property. I stepped around the side of the house just in time to see a dark SUV pull up and idle by my gate. It wasn't marked like a patrol car, no decals, no lights. The driver's window slid down, and there she was again. Karen Blackwood, hair perfect, sunglasses perched like she was about to host a yacht club luncheon. She didn't get out this time. Instead, she leaned toward the open window. "Mr. Rivers," she called, voice syrupy. "I hope you took our notice seriously." I took a deep breath. "Karen, I'm going to say this once more. You and your HOA have zero authority here. Yesterday, the sheriff made that very clear. I'm not moving an inch." Her smile was tighter now, like she was holding back something less polite. "Sheriff's deputies don't set property policy. Our board does. You'll find it's easier to work with us than against us." Before I could respond, another vehicle pulled up, the same county patrol SUV from yesterday. Harris stepped out, his partner close behind. I swear I could see the relief on their faces that this was going to be quick. "Morning, Tom." "Karen," Harris said with a nod so faint it was almost insulting. "We got a call about a dispute." "I called," Karen cut in. "This man is obstructing an HOA inspection. I have every right." Harris held up a hand. "Ma'am, we went through this yesterday. You do not have jurisdiction here. You can't inspect, you can't serve notices, and you can't make him leave. You show up here again with this nonsense, and it's going in a formal report for harassment." Karen's sunglasses hit her eyes, but her jaw worked like she was chewing rocks. "You're making a mistake, officer. A serious one." The other deputy looked at me. "Tom, do you want to press trespassing charges from yesterday? We still have your statement." I thought about it for a second. Not yet. But if they set foot past that gate again without an invitation, yes. Karen didn't like that answer. She gunned the SUV's engine and pulled away in a spray of sand. No goodbye this time. Harris stayed a moment longer. "Tom, I know you can handle yourself, but keep your cameras rolling if they show up again. We'll keep an extra unit swinging by." After they left, I stood there, watching the road until it was empty again. Lisa came out onto the porch with her coffee. "So, round 2. "Looks like it," I said. And something tells me she's not the type to quit just because she's wrong. I spent the rest of the morning checking my security cameras, both the ones on the house and the newer battery-powered ones I'd mounted along the fence line. Every angle was covered. If she, or anyone from her HOA, came onto my property again, I'd have proof. By mid-afternoon, I'd almost managed to put the whole thing out of my mind. The kids were down on the beach. Lisa was reading in the hammock, and I was fixing a loose hinge on the back gate when I caught movement near the dunes again. This time, it was just a lone man in business casual carrying a clipboard. He stopped at the edge of my property, took a few photos of the house, and walked back the way he came. No words, no introduction. That night, as the breeze shifted and the ocean smell grew stronger, I felt a nagging sense of anticipation. Not fear, just the awareness that this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't slink away quietly. They regrouped, reloaded, and came back with a new angle. And when they did, I'd be ready. The third morning should have been perfect. The sun was coming up in a blaze of orange over the Atlantic. The tide was low enough for the kids to hunt shells, and Lisa had already started talking about grilling fresh snapper for dinner. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when a sound shattered the calm, a heavy metallic thud, followed by the unmistakable scrape of something being dragged across gravel. I set my mug down and walked toward the front of the property. Rounding the corner, I froze. A battered flatbed truck was parked just outside my fence, its tailgate down. Two men in dusty work clothes were tossing chunks of broken concrete, splintered plywood, and rusted rebar into a pile right next to my gate. They weren't being gentle about it. Each piece landed with a crash that sent dust and grit into the air. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. Both men looked up, startled. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, wiped his hands on his jeans. "You the owner?" he asked. "Yeah, and you're dumping construction waste on my property. Care to explain?" The guy shrugged. "We got a work order from Ocean Pearl HOA. Said to drop this here as part of a beautification and compliance project." I stepped closer, making sure my phone camera was rolling. "Ocean Pearl HOA doesn't own this land. They don't have any authority here. Pick it up, put it back on the truck, and get off my property." The other man glanced at his partner. "We're just doing what we were told. They said the place needed cleaning up." I gestured at the pile. "That's not cleaning up. That's dumping. And it's illegal, so unless you want to explain this to the sheriff, you'll start moving." They hesitated, clearly debating whether the job was worth the headache. I pulled my phone away from my face just long enough to call dispatch. "Yeah, it's Rivers again. Got two men dumping debris under orders from Ocean Pearl HOA. Got them on camera." That seemed to make up their minds. Without another word, they started picking up the debris, tossing it back onto the truck. It wasn't a delicate process. The concrete clanged against the bed. The wood cracked, but at least it was leaving. By the time they were done, both were sweaty and sullen. "We didn't know, man," the tall one said before climbing into the cab. "We just get the orders." "Next time, check who's giving them," I said, still filming, especially if the sheriff's already told them to stay away. The truck rattled off down the road, leaving a patch of scuffed sand where the pile had been. I turned back toward the house and noticed Lisa watching from the porch, her arms crossed. "This is harassment," she said flatly. "Yeah," I agreed. "And it's only going to get worse before it gets better." Around lunchtime, I went out to check the mailbox, which sits at the end of the short gravel drive. Inside was a plain white envelope. No return address. The front marked simply Rivers. No stamp, which meant someone had walked up and put it there by hand. I opened it right there at the gate. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in a bold, blocky font. "You don't belong here. Leave before it gets ugly." I turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. No signature, no date. Just a threat. The kind of thing that wasn't specific enough for an arrest, but specific enough to keep you watching over your shoulder. I took it inside, slid it into a gallon-sized evidence bag I keep around for fishing licenses and important papers, and set it on the kitchen counter. "We're showing this to Mark," I told Lisa. And the sheriff. By mid-afternoon, I had the security footage queued up from the morning's incident. The truck pulling up, the debris being dumped, my conversation with the workers. I also checked the footage from the driveway cam. Sure enough, around 10 p.m. the previous night, a figure in a hoodie had walked up to the mailbox, paused, and slipped the envelope inside. The camera didn't catch the face clearly, but the build and gait made me think of one of Karen's compliance officers. I sent everything to Mark, my attorney friend in Savannah, with a brief note. "They're escalating." His reply came fast. "Keep everything. We'll use it." That evening, the mood in the house was tense. The kids could feel it, even if we tried to keep things light over dinner. Every time a car slowed on the road, Lisa's head turned toward the window. I didn't say it out loud, but I was already planning the next step. Karen had made her move, and now it was my turn. By the next morning, I was done playing defense. I'd spent the night running through scenarios in my head, every one of them ending with me dragging Karen and her merry band of HOA zealots into a courtroom and watching them get shredded by a judge. I've been out of active practice for years, but old habits die hard, and this was starting to feel less like a nuisance and more like a case file. After breakfast, I called Mark and told him I was coming into Savannah. Lisa wanted to come along, but I convinced her to stay with the kids. Someone had to be home in case our neighbors decided to get creative again. I loaded the evidence bag with the anonymous note, a flash drive with the video of the dumping, and printed stills from the mailbox camera. Mark's office was in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of paper, coffee, and ambition. He was already standing when I walked in, hand outstretched, eyes scanning the evidence bag. "They're not wasting time," he said, flipping the note over as if it might have a hidden message. "This is harassment, borderline criminal threats." "Borderline?" I asked. He smirked. "We'll push it over the line." I laid out the timeline, the fake eviction notice, the police visit, the dumping, the threat. Mark was scribbling in a yellow legal pad the whole time, pausing only to underline something or tap his pen against the desk when he liked an angle. "Here's what we do," he said finally. "We file a formal harassment complaint with the sheriff's office today. At the same time, I'll draft a civil suit against Karen personally, claims for defamation, attempted unlawful eviction, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We'll also send a cease and desist to the HOA itself. That puts them on notice and makes every step they take from here a liability." "Good," I said. "Let's also put in the letter that any contact from them, verbal, written, physical, goes straight into evidence." Mark grinned. "Spoken like a man who's been in the game." From there, we walked down the street to the sheriff's office. Harris wasn't at the desk, but the deputy on duty recognized my name and waved us back. I handed over the evidence bag, the flash drive, and a typed statement. The deputy read through it, nodding. "This is exactly the kind of pattern we need to see," he said. "We'll attach this to the existing call logs from your property. If they come back, we'll be ready to escalate." Back at Mark's office, he drafted the cease and desist. It was 3 pages of pure legal brickwork, every paragraph a wall Karen would have to climb if she wanted to keep coming after me. We printed 2 copies, one for certified mail to the HOA's official address and one to be hand-delivered to Karen herself. "I can have a process server take this to her house today," Mark said. "Better than you knocking on her door and catching a trespassing complaint." I left Savannah mid-afternoon, the weight in my chest lighter than it had been in days. This wasn't over, but now it felt like a fight I was dictating, not just reacting to. As I turned off the highway toward the coast, I caught sight of a familiar sign, Ocean Pearl Estates, Private Community. I slowed just enough to take in the gleaming white letters and manicured hedges. Somewhere past that gate, Karen was going to get a very unwelcome delivery. When I pulled into my driveway, Lisa was waiting on the porch. "Anything?" she asked. "Plenty," I said, setting my briefcase on the step. "We're going on the offensive, and they're not going to like it." We spent the rest of the evening tightening up the property. I double-checked the cameras, added fresh batteries to the motion sensors, and moved one of the portable units to face the path from the dunes. Lisa brought out iced tea and a grim smile. "Feels like we're fortifying against a siege." "Not far off," I said, "but this time, we're ready." The ocean was calm that night, the kind of calm that always made me think of a poker table, everyone holding their cards, waiting for the next play. And I knew Karen's next move was coming soon. It didn't take long for the pushback to start. Less than 48 hours after Mark's cease and desist went out, I came back from a morning walk along the beach to find a glossy business card tucked into the crack of my front door. The name was printed in gold script, Graham and Cole Luxury Realty. On the back, in neat handwriting, it read, "If you ever decide to sell, call me. We can make it worth your while." I didn't know Graham or Cole, but I didn't have to be a genius to guess which HOA president might have suggested the outreach. I tossed the card onto my kitchen counter and made a mental note to give it to Mark. By mid-afternoon, I had my confirmation. A knock at the gate revealed my neighbor from 2 lots down, an older guy named Carl, who owned one of the few other oceanfront houses outside the HOA boundary. Carl's the kind of man who always looks like he's just come back from fishing, sun-worn skin, baseball cap, hands like driftwood. "You got a minute?" he asked, leaning on the gate. "Sure," I said, opening it. "What's up?" He stepped inside, glancing toward the dunes as if expecting someone to be eavesdropping. "Karen's been talking," he said. "Bragging, really. Telling folks at Ocean Pearl Socials she's got a plan to make this stretch of beach match their standards. You, me, and the Hendersons down the way. We're all on her list. She already sent her people to the Hendersons with one of those fake notices. They didn't want the fight, so they listed last month. I remembered seeing the Hendersons' place dark last time I walked past. They sold? Pending. Cash buyer. Word is Karen's friends in real estate lined it up." He shook his head. "She's playing the long game. Pressure, paperwork, rumors, until folks decide it's easier to sell than stand their ground. That hit me harder than I expected. I'd been thinking of this as my personal war with Karen, but hearing Carl lay it out like that made it clear. This was a campaign, and I wasn't the first target. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked. He shrugged. "Didn't have proof. And honestly, I figured you'd already heard. But now, I'm tired of watching her steamroll people. I'll give a statement. Hell, I'll testify if it comes to that." We shook on it, and before he left, he added, "You might want to talk to the Martins, 2 streets inland. They had a run-in with her over a boat trailer last year. She slapped them with HOA fines they didn't know. They fought it, and she doubled down. They might have records." That evening, I drove over to the Martins. Nice couple, mid-40s, the kind who still mow their own lawn. When I explained what was happening, the wife disappeared into a back room and came out with a manila folder thick with papers, letters from the HOA, printouts of emails from Karen herself, and copies of their own property deed showing they weren't. Under HOA jurisdiction, she hates losing, the husband said, even when she's clearly in the wrong, especially then. By the time I got home, I had 2 sworn statements, copies of deeds, and enough anecdotal evidence to start drawing a map of Karen's harassment network. I called Mark, filled him in, and scanned everything over to him that night. "This is good," he said. "It establishes a pattern. Judges like patterns. They make it easier to see malicious intent. Keep digging. If there are more of these, we can show she's not just overstepping, she's running a scheme." I couldn't help but think of the cease and desist letter sitting unopened on her desk. Karen wasn't the type to be deterred by paper, even when it came with legal teeth. If anything, she'd take it as a challenge. The next morning, I found out just how right I was. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was Carl. "You might want to check the Ocean Pearl HOA website," he said, "before they take it down." I pulled it up on my laptop. Right there, on the Community Expansion page, was a freshly posted map of the HOA's updated coastal boundaries. And sure enough, 3 highlighted parcels extended past their old limits: mine, Carl's, and the Hendersons. The map was labeled approved and dated 2 weeks earlier, signed electronically by Karen herself. If she thought a fake web post was going to make this real, she was in for a nasty surprise. I took screenshots from every angle, saved the HTML files, and sent them to Mark. He called back almost immediately. "This is gold," he said. "Not only is it false, but it's public misrepresentation. She's just handed us another claim, fraud." And with that, the walls around her scheme started to crack. Mark wasted no time turning the fake boundary map into a weapon. By that afternoon, he'd filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against the HOA, arguing that they were actively publishing fraudulent claims of jurisdiction over private property. It wasn't just about me anymore. Carl and the Hendersons were included, which meant this was now a multi-party action. The judge granted a preliminary hearing for the following week. That might sound quick, but in legal terms, it was lightning speed, which told me the court smelled something rotten. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office called me in. Deputy Harris was there this time, leaning back in his chair with the kind of smirk that said he'd been waiting for this moment. "Rivers, you really stirred the hornet's nest," he said. "We got your complaint, and now we've got 3 others in the last 2 days. Same MO. Karen showing up with paperwork that has no legal standing, trying to muscle folks out. People are finally talking." "That's because they're realizing she's not untouchable," I said. Harris nodded. "Just be ready. Folks like her, they don't back down clean. They get desperate." That warning proved prophetic. The very next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. I rushed out to find a small excavator idling just beyond my fence, its operator looking confused as hell. "Can I help you?" I called out. "Got a work order here," he said, holding up a clipboard. "Says to start clearing debris and leveling for landscaping. Address matches yours." "Let me guess, HOA sent you?" Yeah," said they're bringing your property into compliance. I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Not happening. You're trespassing the second that bucket touches my soil. You see those cameras? They're recording right now. You start work. I call the sheriff, and you explain why you're following an illegal order." The man hesitated, then climbed out of the cab. "I'm just doing my job, sir. I'll call it in." 5 minutes later, he was gone, leaving tire tracks in the sand and another piece of evidence for the folder. Mark's reaction when I told him was immediate. "Perfect. That's attempted conversion of property, trying to alter or improve land without consent. Judges eat that up in harassment cases. We decided to hit back harder. Mark subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications for the last 6 months. Emails, meeting notes, memos. It was a fishing expedition, sure, but one we both knew might net something big. While he worked that angle, I kept gathering allies. The Martins gave me a thumb drive with every email Karen had ever sent them, including one where she'd outright admitted she knew they weren't under HOA authority, but fined them anyway, to set an example. Carl talked to 2 more former owners who'd sold under pressure and were willing to give affidavits. Every new document, every statement was another brick in the wall I was building around my case. And I had a feeling Karen was starting to realize it. Late that evening, as I sat on the porch watching the tide roll in, a car slowed in front of my gate. It wasn't one I recognized, a dark sedan with tinted windows. It lingered just long enough for me to notice, then rolled on toward the highway. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was another one of Karen's subtle little intimidation games. Either way, I was past the point of being rattled. The more she pushed, the harder I was going to push back. And, with the hearing set for next week, I knew it was only a matter of time before everything she'd built came crashing down in front of her. The courthouse in Savannah has this old, imposing charm. Tall brick walls, polished wooden benches, and the faint smell of paper and varnish that makes you feel like every word spoken there matters. I arrived early not because I needed to, but because I wanted Karen to see me calm, collected, and ready. She showed up 20 minutes later, flanked by 2 HOA board members and a man in an overpriced suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mark leaned toward me. That's their attorney. Name's Randall Peters. Reputation for being aggressive in depositions but folds when the evidence stacks high enough. When the hearing began, the judge wasted no time. We are here on an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order against the Ocean Pearl Homeowners Association and Ms. Karen Blackwood specifically for alleged harassment, trespassing, and misrepresentation of property boundaries. His tone carried a weight that made even Karen sit straighter. Mark went first. He laid it all out. Copies of the real county boundary maps, the fraudulent map from the HOA's website, the fake eviction notice, the video of the sheriff's deputies laughing at her papers, sworn statements from Carl, the Martins, and even the Hendersons who had been pressured into selling. Each exhibit was handed to the judge with quiet precision, like laying cards on a poker table when you already know your hand is unbeatable. Then came the highlight, the emails. The subpoena had come back 2 days before, and inside the HOA's correspondence was a chain that made my jaw drop even after everything I'd seen. In one message to her board, Karen had written, "We have to get him out. The property will triple in value once it's under HOA control. Use whatever compliance measures necessary. Don't give him room to breathe." When Mark read that aloud, you could feel the oxygen leave the room. Peters shifted in his seat. Karen's jaw tightened, and for the first time since this whole mess started, she didn't look smug. She looked cornered. Peters tried to counter, arguing that the HOA had acted within its perceived jurisdiction and that any errors were good faith misunderstandings. But Mark didn't let that slide. A misunderstanding does not involve falsifying legal boundaries, threatening homeowners, and issuing work orders on property you don't own. He shot back. That is intentional misconduct. The judge asked Karen directly if she had authorized the updated map on the website. She hesitated, then admitted she had. When asked if she had verified the legal accuracy of that map before publishing it, she muttered something about trusting the board's research. That was the crack we needed. Mark pressed. "So you knowingly represented false information to the public, used it to threaten homeowners with eviction, and initiated work on private property without consent. And you call that a misunderstanding?" Karen's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The judge announced he would take the matter under advisement, but was leaning toward granting the restraining order and referring certain elements to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a shift. This wasn't just about keeping my house anymore. It was about making sure Karen never pulled this on anyone again. And judging by the look on her face as she passed me in the hallway, she knew the walls were closing in fast. The final hearing came a month later, after the district attorney had finished combing through every scrap of evidence Mark had handed over. The courtroom was packed, not just with our witnesses, but with curious locals, a couple of reporters from the Savannah paper, and even some disgruntled HOA members who'd clearly had enough of Karen's reign. Karen walked in looking like she'd aged a decade. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit and that sharp, predatory posture. She was pale, stiff, and visibly uncomfortable under the weight of what was about to happen. Peters looked just as worn down, no doubt realizing this case wasn't going to be a notch in his win column. The judge didn't waste time. He read the charges one by one: fraudulent misrepresentation, harassment, trespassing, attempted unlawful eviction, and falsification of official records. For each, he laid out the evidence: the forged boundary map, the eviction notice with no legal basis, the work orders sent to contractors, the threatening letter with no return address, and the damning emails about tripling property value by forcing me out. Karen tried to interrupt at one point, claiming she'd been acting in the community's best interest, but the judge silenced her with a look that could freeze seawater. The community's interest, he said, does not give you license to break the law. When the sentencing came, the room was silent, except for the judge's voice. Ms. Blackwood, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison, a fine of $50,000, and ordered to pay $85,000 in restitution to Mr. Thomas Rivers for emotional distress, legal costs, and damages. Additionally, the Ocean Pearl HOA will be required to remove all fraudulent documentation from public records, issue formal apologies to all affected property owners, and cover the cost of restoring Mr. Rivers' property to its prior condition. The gasp from the gallery was almost satisfying enough on its own. Almost. Karen's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She just stared ahead, hollow-eyed, as deputies escorted her out in handcuffs. Some of her own HOA members didn't bother hiding their relief. One even muttered, "About damn time," as she passed. Over the next week, contractors, not hired by me this time, arrived to haul away the debris they'd dumped, repair the fence they'd damaged, and repaint the gate where the HOA's little compliance notices had been nailed up. I watched it all from the porch with a mug of coffee, feeling the last of the tension unwind from my shoulders. A month later, my family and I returned for another stretch by the ocean. The place felt different now, lighter somehow. I installed a new sign on the gate: private oceanfront property, no HOA allowed. Not subtle, but it got the point across. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the water, Carl wandered over with a couple of beers. "You know," he said, "your fight probably saved a lot of people around here." I took a sip and smiled. Maybe. But if it also ruined Karen's little empire, I'll call it a bonus. We sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the waves and the distant cries of gulls. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about maps, lawyers, or subpoenas. I was just home, exactly where I belonged.